My name is Avery Gemma, and I was 29 the afternoon my parents slid a Hawaiian luxury cruise itinerary across a coffee shop table and told me I would be spending my next 2 weeks babysitting my sister's children for free. My mother smiled a tight, practiced smile when she said they deserved a break, and since I was single, I did not have any real responsibilities anyway. My father did not even look up from his gold watch when he referred to my career as playing on computers. I didn't argue. I didn't say a single word in my own defense, but here is what neither of them knew. I am a lead cloud systems architect. I build secure, high-level data networks for a living, and for the last 5 years, I had been quietly transferring $2,500 on the first of every month into their checking account to keep them from losing their home. Or so I thought. When my mother handed me that $12,000 vacation itinerary, she handed me the undeniable proof of their financial abuse. What happened when they tried to check their luggage at Seattle-Tacoma Airport 3 days later is the reason I am sitting here telling you this. Welcome back to Morning Revenge, where we share true stories of quiet victories, ironclad boundaries, and the exact moment someone finally unplugs a toxic family system. If you have ever been treated like a free ATM by the people who were supposed to protect you, tell me your age in the comments and hit subscribe. The rain drove sideways against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the downtown Seattle roastery. Inside, the air smelled of dark espresso and damp wool coats, but the temperature at our corner table felt freezing. I sat perfectly still, tracing the rim of my ceramic mug. 14 days, Brenda said, tapping a French manicured fingernail against the heavy cardstock of the brochure. We sail out of Honolulu on the 12th. You will need to pick up Mia and Leo from Lauren's house by Friday afternoon. Make sure you clear out your guest room. I stared at the cover photo, a massive, sun-drenched ship cutting through azure water. I am leading the final phase of a server migration next week, I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. I work 70-hour weeks during a rollout. I cannot watch Lauren's children. Richard let out a sharp breath, waving his hand as if swatting a fly. Avery, you play on computers. You sit in an air-conditioned room typing. It is not like you are managing a real business. He adjusted the lapels of his cashmere overcoat. Besides, you have no husband, no kids of your own. Your sister has a household to run and a marriage to maintain. We need a break. It is your turn to pitch in. I absorbed the assessment. In my parents' traditional metrics, my existence was a convenient void. A high-earning single woman was just empty space waiting to be filled by their demands. Brenda reached across the table. Her fingers grazed the sleeve of my tailored charcoal blazer. You spend so much on these rigid little suits, dear. What for? You have nothing tying you down. Lauren is exhausted. We are exhausted. You owe us this. I did not pull my arm away. Instead, my eyes locked onto my mother's wrist. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the amber lighting of the cafe. I shifted my gaze back to the cruise itinerary near my half-empty matcha latte. My brain operates on logic and systems. Sitting there, I ran the numbers. 60 months, $2,500 a month, $150,000. I had funded their deficit, assuming I was preserving their dignity and keeping a roof over their heads. They were not preserving a mortgage. They were purchasing luxury. And right now, they were demanding I serve as unpaid labor so they could enjoy the vacation my paycheck had subsidized. The realization did not arrive with screaming or tears. It settled over me with the cold clarity of a network diagnostic. The architecture of this family dynamic was compromised. I functioned as the power supply. They functioned as the drain. I see, I said. I stood up and slung my leather briefcase over my shoulder. I offered no defense of my career, no justification for my schedule. Where are you going? Richard demanded, leaning forward in his chair. We are not finished discussing the drop-off schedule. "We are finished," I replied. I dropped a crisp $50 bill on the reclaimed wood table to cover the tab. I turned and walked out into the windswept Seattle afternoon, leaving the glossy brochure sitting beside my cup. I had a digital ecosystem to secure, and the first vulnerability I intended to patch was my own bank account. The elevator ride up to the 34th floor of my building felt longer than usual. My wet boots made a quiet squeaking sound against the polished slate floor of the cab. When the steel doors finally slid open, I walked down the silent, carpeted hallway and pressed my thumb against the biometric lock of my front door. The deadbolt engaged with a heavy, satisfying thud. Inside, the temperature was a steady 68 degrees. My condo was a study in minimalism, devoid of clutter, decorated in stark whites and charcoal grays. Floor-to-ceiling windows formed the entire western wall, framing a panoramic view of Puget Sound. Outside, the Seattle storm was turning the water into a churning expanse of slate and sea foam, while the green and white commuter ferries carved slow paths through the fog. I stood by the glass for a long time. I watched the rain track down the thick panes, listening to the muffled howl of the wind. I took off my damp blazer and draped it over the back of a dining chair. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of sparkling water, and set my laptop on the stainless steel island. The aluminum casing felt cold under my palms. I woke the screen. My daily routine always started here. I opened my work portal and navigated to the cloud server dashboards I managed for our enterprise clients. Lines of traffic data scrolled past in neat, predictable columns. Green indicators pulsed in a steady rhythm, confirming that data packets were routing properly across 3 different continents. I found a deep, grounding comfort in this interface. Systems built on binary code follow logical rules. A server either processes a request or it drops it. Hardware does not rely on emotional manipulation. A firewall does not demand gratitude for simply existing. There is a clean, undeniable truth to digital architecture that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic, grasping nature of my family. I minimized the work dashboard and opened a secure browser window. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed to dismantle a system I had been running for half a decade. Growing up, I was trained to be the functional daughter. My older sister Lauren was the golden child, a title she earned by being loud, demanding, and constantly in need of rescue. Lauren required elaborate birthday parties, expensive tutors to pass basic math, and a wedding that rivaled a royal coronation. My parents eagerly funded every crisis and every triumph Lauren manufactured. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. I got straight A grades without being asked. I secured a full academic scholarship to a prestigious university, saving them thousands. My mother used to pat my shoulder and tell her friends how easy I was to raise, how I never asked for a thing. I did not realize until much later that being easy to manage just meant you were easy to exploit. 5 years ago, I received my first major promotion to lead architect. My salary jumped into a tax bracket my parents could barely comprehend. 2 days after I shared the news, my father called. His voice was tight, practiced, heavy with manufactured shame. He spoke about a sudden shift in his pension payouts. He mentioned the rising property taxes on their home. He let the silence hang on the line, a masterful display of guilt, until I offered the solution he had designed me to offer. I set up an automated transfer, $2,500 scheduled for the first of every single month. It was a silent agreement. We never discussed it again. I assumed I was protecting their retirement, ensuring they would not lose the house I grew up in. I typed my credentials into my personal banking portal. The screen authenticated my login and loaded my primary dashboard. I clicked into the Recurring Transfers tab. There it was, a single line item sitting quietly in the digital ledger. Richard and Brenda Gemma, first of the month, active. I downloaded the historical statement for that specific routing number. A spreadsheet materialized on my screen, rows of identical transactions stretching back 60 months. I highlighted the column and glanced at the automatic sum generated at the bottom of the window, $150,000. I stared at the number. It was the price of a starter home. It was a robust retirement portfolio. It was years of my labor late nights debugging code and missed holidays. I had given it away willingly to protect a vulnerability that did not actually exist. I opened a new tab and typed in the name of the luxury cruise line from the brochure my mother had slid across the coffee shop table. I found the specific Hawaiian itinerary departing out of Honolulu on the 12th. I clicked through the booking options, matching the details Brenda had bragged about in previous conversations. Owner's suite, oceanfront balcony, premium dining packages. The checkout page generated a minimum subtotal of $12,400. My mother's diamond tennis bracelet flashed in my memory. My father's cashmere overcoat. The math laid itself bare, raw and undeniable. My parents were not struggling. They were laundering my empathy to subsidize a lifestyle they could not afford on their own. And their entitlement had grown so vast that they now expected me to provide free childcare for the golden child, while they spent my money on tropical excursions. I toggled back to my banking portal. I moved the cursor over the active transfer line. In my profession, when a network node begins draining resources without authorization, you do not send the node a warning message. You do not call a meeting to negotiate terms with a virus. You isolate the threat and you sever the connection. I clicked the button labeled Edit Schedule. A drop-down menu appeared. I moved the mouse down to the final option in red text. Delete recurring transaction. I expected a wave of familial guilt to wash over me. I expected my heart rate to spike or my hands to shake. Instead, I felt only the hum of the refrigerator in my quiet kitchen. I felt the steady rhythm of the rain against the glass. I clicked Delete. A confirmation box popped up in the center of the screen. Are you sure you wish to cancel this scheduled transfer? This action cannot be undone. I clicked Yes. The screen refreshed. The ledger cleared. The line item vanished into the digital void. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark. I did not draft a text message to my mother. I did not call my father to warn him. Establishing a boundary requires action, not debate. Providing notice would only invite a negotiation, and I was finished negotiating my worth. I looked at the digital calendar hanging on the wall near my entryway. Today was Monday. Their flight to Honolulu departed on Friday morning. The first day of the month fell on Thursday. For 5 years, they had relied on my Thursday deposit to clear their accounts, to pay down the credit cards they used for their luxury purchases, and to fund their weekend getaways. They were flying out on Friday, fully expecting an injection of $2,500 to cover their luggage fees, their airport drinks, and their vacation spending money. They were going to arrive at the ticketing counter at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport with maxed out limits and empty checking accounts. I picked up my glass of sparkling water and walked back to the window. The storm over Puget Sound was intensifying the waves, crashing harder against the distant piers. The countdown had officially started. I took a slow sip of water and let the system crash. Friday morning at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport presented a masterclass in organized chaos. Thousands of travelers flooded Terminal A. The air carried the mixed scents of floor wax, roasted coffee beans, and nervous sweat. Fluorescent lights reflected off the polished linoleum, illuminating a sea of rushing bodies and rolling suitcases. At the premier check-in counter, my parents stood separated from the frantic crowds by a velvet rope. Richard wore a tailored navy blazer and expensive loafers. Brenda stood beside him, draped in a silk scarf, resting one hand on a towering stack of matched designer luggage. They projected an image of effortless wealth, a carefully constructed illusion about to shatter under the weight of reality. The ticketing agent, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Sarah, typed briskly on her keyboard. She informed them that their 4 oversized trunks incurred a heavy baggage surcharge. The total came to $800. Richard did not flinch. He produced a heavy, platinum credit card from his leather wallet with a practiced flick of his wrist and handed it across the counter. He offered a condescending smile, the kind reserved for service workers he considered beneath his notice. Sarah inserted the chip into the terminal. A few seconds passed. A short, flat beep echoed from the machine. "Declined," she said, her voice entirely neutral. "Do you have another form of payment?" Richard dropped his smile. He snatched the card back, his jaw tightening. He muttered a complaint about bank security algorithms flagging legitimate travel expenses. He pulled out a gold card, his secondary account, and thrust it toward the agent. The machine processed the chip. The same flat beep sounded. "Declined," Sarah repeated. A restless murmur rippled through the long line of passengers standing behind the velvet rope. People shifted their weight, checking their watches. The sound grated on Richard. He hated public embarrassment more than anything in the world. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Run it again," Richard demanded, his voice rising in volume. "There is plenty of capital in that account. Your machine is malfunctioning. Get your manager out here right now." While Richard initiated his tirade, Brenda reached into her designer handbag. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her smartphone. She opened her banking application, relying on facial recognition to unlock the screen. She navigated to their primary joint checking account. She expected to see the comfortable cushion of my $2,500 deposit, the funds that always arrived on the first Thursday of the month. Instead, the screen displayed a negative balance in bright red text. Brenda refreshed the application. The numbers did not change. She scrolled through the recent transactions. She saw the automatic payments for their expensive car insurance, the utility bills for their large house, and the grocery deliveries. She searched for the incoming transfer from my routing number. The ledger was entirely empty. The deposit never arrived. "Richard," Brenda whispered, tugging at the sleeve of his navy blazer. "Richard, stop yelling." Richard ignored her. He leaned over the counter, pointing a finger at the ticketing agent. "Do you have any idea how many miles I fly with this airline? I will have your job for this incompetence. You are going to bypass this ridiculous fee and print my boarding passes immediately." Sarah did not blink. She had worked at the airport for a decade and possessed an immune system built to withstand adult temper tantrums. "Sir," she said calmly, "I cannot print your boarding passes or check your luggage without a valid payment. If you cannot provide a working card, I must ask you to step aside so I can assist the next guest in line." Richard opened his mouth to shout again, but Brenda gripped his arm hard. She turned the screen of her phone toward him. Richard looked down at the glowing red negative balance. All the air left his lungs. The reality of the situation crashed down upon them both. They could not pay the baggage fees. They could not buy a meal in the terminal. They were standing in front of an international check-in counter with thousands of dollars worth of clothing packed into luxury suitcases, and they possessed zero purchasing power. The agent pointed toward the exit doors. Defeated, humiliated, and panicking, Richard and Brenda dragged their heavy trunks away from the counter, stranded in the middle of Terminal A. 15 miles away, my office maintained a climate-controlled serenity. The corporate campus in downtown Seattle hummed with quiet efficiency. I sat in my ergonomic chair, surrounded by 3 curved monitors displaying lines of infrastructure code. The air smelled of ozone and expensive green tea. My personal smartphone rested face up on the edge of my glass desk. The screen illuminated, vibrating against the smooth surface. The caller identification displayed a single contact name, Mom Urgent. I did not reach for the device. I leaned back in my chair, picked up my ceramic mug, and took a slow sip of my matcha latte. I watched the phone buzz, travel a fraction of an inch across the glass, and go dark. 5 seconds later, it lit up again. The cycle repeated 3 times. My mother was dialing continuously, a digital manifestation of her sheer desperation. I set the ceramic mug down. I picked up the phone and flipped it face down, silencing the vibration. I returned my attention to the middle monitor, executing a script to test a new security firewall. 10 minutes later, an icon appeared in the corner of my screen. A new voicemail had landed in my inbox. I clicked the play button. The audio routed through my noise-canceling headphones. Brenda sounded breathless, her voice tight with a mixture of rage and terror. "Avery, answer your phone right now. We are at the ticketing counter and our cards are frozen. I checked the bank app. Your transfer did not clear. You need to call your bank and fix this error immediately. We are going to miss our flight. Call me back the second you get this message. Where is our money?" I listened to the message twice. I paid particular attention to her choice of words. She did not ask if I was experiencing financial trouble. She did not express concern for my well-being. She simply demanded to know the location of her designated funds. The entitlement was so deeply ingrained in her psyche that she viewed my paycheck as her personal property. I minimized the audio player. I opened my personal cloud storage drive and created a new folder. I typed the label Legal Archive onto the digital tab. I dragged the audio file containing her frantic voicemail and dropped it into the secure folder. Documentation is the foundation of any strong defense, whether you are building a data network or dismantling a toxic family structure. I returned to my coding project, typing a string of commands with steady fingers. My parents were currently trapped in a public transit hub, grappling with the sudden collapse of their artificial wealth. But the financial shockwave I initiated was not contained to just them. The money they siphoned from me did not stay in their checking account. It flowed outward, watering the roots of another elaborate lie. By severing the main line, I had inadvertently cut the power to my older sister as well. Later that evening, Lauren would discover just how fragile her perfect life truly was. I packed up my laptop, fully prepared for the golden child to come knocking on my door. The sun had set over Seattle, leaving the city skyline glowing against the dark, rain-washed clouds. I was in my kitchen, preparing a simple dinner of roasted wild salmon and grilled asparagus. The digital clock on the stove read 7:45. The rhythmic chopping of my chef knife against the cutting board offered a soothing, predictable cadence. My smartphone rested on the marble counter, remaining silent. I had already routed my parents' numbers directly to a blocked voicemail folder. I anticipated a quiet evening, a brief respite before the weekend. Then, the wall-mounted intercom buzzed, shattering the calm. It was Thomas, the evening concierge for my building. He sounded deeply apologetic. He informed me my sister was standing at the front desk, demanding immediate access to the secure residential elevators. I instructed Thomas to keep her downstairs in the lobby. I would come down to meet her. I refused to let her frantic, entitled energy contaminate my personal sanctuary. I wiped my hands on a towel, smoothed the front of my dark cashmere sweater, and headed for the door. Lauren was 4 years older than me and lived a life constructed entirely for social media consumption. Her husband, Greg, ran a technology startup that always seemed to reside in a perpetual phase of seeking venture capital without ever launching a viable product. They lived in a sprawling modern farmhouse in Bellevue, sent their children to a private preschool they could ill afford, and maintained a pristine public image of effortless affluence. Growing up, our parents praised Lauren for her ambition, which was just a polite way of saying she possessed a relentless drive to acquire expensive things. They conditioned her to believe she was the main character of our family unit. Whenever Lauren failed, my parents rushed in to cushion the fall financially and emotionally. I was merely the supporting cast, the quiet younger sister expected to stay out of the way and manage my own problems. I earned my degrees, secured my high-paying career, and asked them for nothing. They interpreted my self-reliance as a resource they could freely harvest to keep Lauren comfortable. I stepped out of the elevator into the expansive marble-floored lobby. The space was designed to intimidate, featuring towering concrete columns and minimalist leather seating. Lauren paced near the security desk like a caged animal. She wore a beige trench coat and oversized sunglasses despite the dark evening outside. When she spotted me, she marched forward, her heels clicking sharply against the polished stone. I observed her closely as she approached. For a woman obsessed with projecting perfection, the cracks in her facade were glaringly obvious tonight. She clutched a designer leather handbag, but the corners of the purse were visibly scuffed, the gold hardware scratched and dull. Her knuckles were white from gripping the strap so tightly. Her hands trembled as she pulled the sunglasses off her face, revealing bloodshot eyes and hastily applied makeup. The pristine veneer of the Bellevue socialite was fracturing under the weight of sudden financial panic. "You are not answering your phone," Lauren snapped, bypassing any standard greeting. "Mom is having a nervous breakdown in her living room. They missed their flight to Honolulu. Their credit cards are locked. And now my entire weekend is ruined because you decided to throw a temper tantrum. I have a vital wellness retreat booked in Sedona tomorrow morning, and you are going to take Mia and Leo right now." I kept my posture relaxed, folding my arms across my chest. "I am not taking your children, Lauren," I stated, keeping my tone clinical and detached. I communicated my work schedule clearly. "I have a major infrastructure migration to manage. Your wellness retreat is not my responsibility." Lauren scoffed an ugly, guttural sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Do not play the busy professional card with me. You sit at a desk. You do not have a real family." Mom and Dad always promised to take the kids when I needed a break, and now they are stuck in Seattle because you cut off their banking access. "You are going to fix this," my sister demanded, stepping closer. "You are going to transfer the funds to them right now so they can book a new flight, and then you are taking my kids upstairs to your apartment." I looked at my older sister, analyzing the sheer audacity of her demands. I saw the desperation bleeding through her arrogant posture. "I will not be bullied into providing free childcare," I replied, my voice steady. "Nor will I continue to fund our parents' luxury vacations. The financial arrangement is permanently terminated. They are adults. They can pay for their own cruises." Lauren lost whatever fragile grip she held on her composure. Her face contorted, flushing a deep, angry crimson. She stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "Cruises!" she shrieked. "Do you honestly think this is about a vacation? How are Mom and Dad supposed to pay for Greg's car lease now?" The words hung in the cold air. The lobby fell dead silent. Even Thomas, the concierge, stopped typing at his security desk. I did not react physically, but my mind raced, processing the new data point. Greg drove a custom-imported electric SUV, a vehicle that leased for at least $1,500 a month. My parents had claimed they needed my monthly deposit to save their house, to pay their rising property taxes to survive a sudden pension cut. They had lied. They were not using my hard-earned salary to protect their retirement. They were acting as a financial conduit, laundering my money straight into Lauren and Greg's bank accounts to subsidize a fake lifestyle. I was not just funding my parents. I was funding my sister's fraudulent existence. The final trace of familial obligation I held for these people evaporated in an instant. The cold detachment inside my chest solidified into something unbreakable, forged by the sheer magnitude of their deception. I looked at Lauren. Her chest heaved. She realized what she had just confessed. The color drained from her cheeks, replacing the angry red with a sickly pale white. She clamped her mouth shut, her scuffed handbag dropping slightly as her posture sagged in defeat. "You just answered a question I did not even know I needed to ask," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register. I stepped backward, putting physical distance between us. "Tell Greg to return the car. Tell Mom and Dad to learn how to budget. And tell yourself whatever you need to survive the weekend, because my wallet is closed forever." I turned my back on her and walked toward the elevators. Lauren stood frozen in the center of the vast lobby, furious, terrified, and entirely out of options. I knew this was not the end. The money pipeline had burst, and the resulting flood was going to push my parents into a desperate corner. They would come for me tomorrow, expecting an emotional fight, but they had no idea they were walking into a tactical trap. Saturday morning arrived with a pale, washed-out sunlight piercing the Seattle cloud cover. I reserved the executive boardroom on the amenities floor of my residential tower. The space was designed for high-level corporate negotiations, featuring soundproof glass walls, a polished concrete floor, and a massive slate table positioned directly in the center. The room felt cold, sterile, and entirely stripped of sentiment. It was the perfect environment for a termination. I dressed with deliberate precision. I selected a tailored navy sheath dress and sharp-pointed leather heels. My hair was pulled back into a severe, immaculate knot. In any conflict, the side that controls the visual narrative dictates the power dynamic. My parents expected to find a weeping, guilt-ridden daughter pacing around a messy living room, desperate to beg for their forgiveness. I intended to present them with an impenetrable corporate entity. At precisely 9 o'clock, the heavy oak doors swung open. Richard and Brenda marched into the room. They looked haggard, carrying the residual exhaustion of their airport humiliation. Richard wore a wrinkled polo shirt, his face drawn and tense. Brenda held a crumpled tissue, her eyes red-rimmed and darting around the expansive boardroom, clearly thrown off balance by the formal setting. Richard did not waste time. He slammed his palms down on the edge of the slate table, leaning forward to project dominance. He had used this exact posture my entire life whenever he wanted to enforce compliance. Growing up, my father loved delivering long, booming lectures about the value of a hard-earned dollar and the sacred duty of familial loyalty. He positioned himself as a patriarch of undeniable moral authority. Looking at him now, I saw nothing but a grifter whose primary revenue stream had just run dry. "What is wrong with you?" Richard bellowed, his voice echoing off the soundproof glass. "You shut off our banking access without a single warning." We stood at an international ticketing counter and were treated like common vagrants. We had to drag our luggage into a taxi and drive back to a dark house. "You humiliated your mother. You humiliated me. You have lost your mind." I stood on the opposite side of the table. I did not flinch. I did not offer a chair. I simply watched his face turn a blotchy, uneven purple. "You are going to fix this banking error immediately," he ordered, pointing a thick finger at my face. "You are going to deposit an extra $5,000 to cover the rebooking fees, and then you are going to apologize to your mother for ruining her anniversary trip. This level of disrespect is unforgivable. We are your family. You owe us your obedience." When Richard ran out of breath, Brenda stepped forward to deploy her preferred weapon. She pressed the crumpled tissue to her nose and let out a dramatic, wavering sob. Brenda possessed a unique talent for manufacturing instant victimhood. She used tears to extract discounts from retail managers and to force apologies from anyone who dared to set a boundary. "Avery, how could you do this to us?" Brenda cried, her voice trembling with engineered heartbreak. "We worked so hard to raise you. We sacrificed everything for you and your sister. This cruise was our dream. We planned it for months. We just wanted a few weeks of peace, and you destroyed our dream over a petty misunderstanding. I have never felt so betrayed in my entire life." I let her tears fall. I let the silence stretch out, filling the cold space between us. In the past, this was the exact moment I would cave. I would rush forward, apologizing profusely, offering whatever resources they demanded just to restore the peace. Today, I remained anchored in place. I reached down and picked up a thick stack of printed paper resting on the slate surface. I slid the document across the smooth table. It stopped inches from Richard's hands. "That is a complete ledger," I stated, my voice echoing with a flat, clinical resonance. "It contains every incoming and outgoing transaction from your primary checking account over the last 60 months. It is legally obtained documentation. I suggest you open it." Richard glared at the stack, refusing to touch it. "What is this garbage?" he muttered, though his bluster faltered slightly. "Since you seem confused about the nature of our relationship, I will summarize the data." I continued, interlocking my fingers and resting them on the table. 5 years ago, you claimed your pension was slashed. You claimed the bank was threatening to foreclose on your property. You presented a crisis. I provided a solution. $2,500 a month. Over 60 months, I deposited exactly $150,000 into your possession. Brenda stopped crying. The tissue dropped slightly from her face. I assumed I was preserving your retirement, I said, staring directly into my father's eyes. But algorithms do not lie. I audited your spending. You did not pay off a mortgage. You did not cover medical debts. You took my salary and you used it to fund luxury vacations, premium cable packages, and expensive restaurant dinners. And what you did not spend on yourselves, you funneled directly to my sister. Richard swallowed hard. His throat visibly bobbed. You do not know what you are talking about, he stammered, crossing his arms defensively. We helped Lauren with a few minor expenses. That is what parents do. They help their children. Paying the lease on Greg's imported electric sports car is not a minor expense. I corrected him instantly. Subsidizing Lauren's private wellness retreats is not a parental duty. You created a money laundering pipeline. You extracted capital from the daughter you viewed as a disposable asset, and you diverted it to fund the fraudulent lifestyle of your golden child. The silence that followed was absolute. The ambient hum of the building ventilation system was the only sound in the room. Richard and Brenda stared at me as if they were looking at a stranger. They expected an emotional, hysterical girl they could easily manipulate with guilt and shouting. Instead, they were facing an architect who had just mapped every vulnerability in their system. You did not keep me around because you loved my company, I said, my tone dropping to a quiet, lethal calm. You kept me around because I was profitable. That business relationship is now permanently terminated. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but no words emerged. The psychological shock of having their deepest, ugliest secret laid bare on a conference table paralyzed them. They realized with crushing certainty that they could not scream, cry, or guilt their way back into my wallet. The truth was documented in black and white. I stepped back from the table. Take the ledger, I instructed them. Read it carefully. I am revoking your access to my building. If you show up here again uninvited, security will have you removed for trespassing. I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving them stranded in the middle of the sterile boardroom. But as I pulled the heavy oak door open, I knew this victory was only temporary. My mother could not control the financial narrative anymore, which meant she would inevitably try to control the social one. Brenda operated on a scorched earth policy. If she could not have my money, she would try to destroy my reputation. I walked back to the elevators, fully bracing for the digital smear campaign that was about to erupt across our entire extended family. The digital smear campaign launched exactly 24 hours after my parents retreated from the residential boardroom. I was standing in my quiet kitchen on Sunday morning, watching the rain wash over the Seattle skyline. The storm had broken, leaving a gray, persistent drizzle. I was grinding fresh coffee beans when my smartphone vibrated against the cool marble counter. It buzzed a single time, then it buzzed twice. A moment later, the device initiated a continuous, relentless vibration that signaled a coordinated digital strike. I wiped my hands on a dry towel and picked up the phone. The notifications cascaded down the screen in a rapid, overlapping sequence. Brenda had activated her secondary weapon. If she could not control my bank account, she would attempt to incinerate my reputation. I opened the primary social networking application to assess the damage. My mother had published a long public statement tagging 24 extended family members to ensure maximum visibility across our entire social circle. I read the paragraphs with the detached clinical curiosity of an analyst reviewing a malware signature. Brenda had crafted a masterpiece of pure fiction. She uploaded a photograph taken 10 years ago during my college graduation, featuring us all smiling and hugging. Beneath the happy image, she detailed a heartbreaking narrative of elderly parents who had sacrificed their prime years to raise a brilliant, successful daughter. She explicitly mentioned my high corporate salary and my luxury downtown condo, planting the seeds of financial resentment. Then she described the agonizing pain of sudden abandonment. She claimed I had abruptly cut ties with the family out of pure greed. She wove in the narrative about the aborted Hawaiian cruise, framing it not as a luxury vacation, but as a desperately needed health retreat for her failing, aging joints. The most vicious lines in her post were reserved for Lauren's children. Brenda wrote that my newfound corporate arrogance had poisoned my heart, causing me to harbor a deep, inexplicable hatred for my own innocent niece and nephew. She claimed I refused to spend a single afternoon with Mia and Leo, leaving my exhausted sister to suffer alone without any support. The comments section was already a chaotic battleground of manufactured outrage. Cousins I had not spoken to in a decade left angry emojis and sympathetic prayers for my mother. Uncles condemned the younger generation for their lack of basic respect. The family ecosystem, always eager for a convenient scapegoat, turned on me with the speed of a synchronized swarm. Then came the direct messages. My phone illuminated with a long text from Aunt Susan. Susan operated as the undisputed matriarch of the extended gossip network. She possessed a terrifying ability to disguise lethal insults as gentle concern. "Avery, sweetheart," her message read, "we are all so worried about your mother. She is completely devastated by your actions. I know your demanding job makes you hard, and living alone in that empty apartment must make it difficult to understand the daily sacrifices of a real family. But you cannot abandon your own blood over money. Please call your parents and apologize before you end up entirely alone." I stared at the glowing screen. The text represented the perfect pebble, a small, seemingly smooth object designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Susan weaponized my single status, implying that because I did not have a husband or children, my life was inherently hollow and devoid of actual value. She framed my financial independence and my career not as achievements, but as personality defects that blinded me to the meaning of love. In my early 20s, an attack of this magnitude would have broken me. I would have drafted a dozen frantic replies, trying to explain the money laundering pipeline, trying to prove my innocence, begging them to understand the truth of the situation. I would have engaged in the mudslinging, attempting to defend my character against a court of public opinion that had already delivered a guilty verdict. But a cloud systems architect understands the fundamental rules of engagement. When a hostile entity launches a distributed denial of service attack, you do not send messages back to the compromised servers. Responding generates traffic. Traffic overloads the system. The only way to survive the flood is to drop the incoming packets and close the vulnerable ports. Narcissists feed on attention. They crave the drama of a public defense. They want the screaming match because the resulting chaos allows them to obscure the underlying facts. I decided to starve them. I did not type a single reply to Aunt Susan. I did not leave a comment on my mother's post to correct her lies. I did not attempt to share my side of the story in the family group chat. Instead, I took screenshots. I captured every defamatory sentence Brenda published on her timeline. I archived the angry, misguided comments from the extended relatives. I saved Aunt Susan's passive-aggressive text message. I collected the digital evidence, methodically transferring every image file into the secure folder labeled Legal Archive on my encrypted hard drive. I recognized that engaging with their delusion gave them a sense of power. My silence would drive them insane. They would check their phones obsessively, waiting for my angry retort, waiting for the tearful apology, waiting for any sign that their emotional terrorism had successfully breached my defenses. When I finished cataloging the evidence, I opened my phone settings. I muted the notifications for the family group chat. I restricted my mother's social profile so she could no longer tag me or see my activity. I set Aunt Susan's messages to route directly to a hidden archive folder where they would not trigger an alert. The digital barrage ceased instantly. My kitchen returned to its peaceful silence. The smell of freshly brewed dark roast coffee filled the air, grounding me in the present moment. The tension in my chest dissolved into a cold, focused energy. The social isolation they tried to impose on me did not feel like a punishment. It felt like a fortress. They had handed me the gift of total silence, removing the final strings of familial guilt that tethered me to their dysfunction. Furthermore, I knew this meticulous documentation would serve a devastating purpose in the near future. When the truth inevitably surfaced, these screenshots would form an inescapable cage of their own making. My mother was currently writing the script for her own public destruction. I carried my coffee to the kitchen island and opened my laptop. The social warfare was merely a distraction, a loud diversion designed to draw my attention away from the real vulnerability in their architecture. My mother was panicking and lashing out because the money pipeline had collapsed. But the pipeline was built to sustain Greg and Lauren. If my sister and her husband were genuinely successful, the loss of my $2,500 monthly deposit would be a minor inconvenience, not an apocalyptic event. I thought back to the previous evening in the lobby. Lauren had screamed about Greg's imported car lease. Her designer handbag was visibly scuffed. Her hands had trembled with a terror that went far beyond missing a wellness retreat. People do not unravel that quickly over a missed car payment. There was a massive structural failure hidden beneath my sister's perfect Bellevue facade. My parents were willing to destroy my reputation and alienate their youngest daughter just to protect Lauren's secret. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The time for defensive maneuvering was over. I needed to know exactly why my sister was bleeding capital at such an alarming rate. I minimized the social media platforms and opened a secure search terminal. I prepared to deploy my analytical skills to dig through public property records, court filings, and state financial registries. The true nature of their desperation was hiding in the data, and I was going straight into the shadows to pull it out into the light. Sunday afternoon bled into early evening. The gray drizzle outside my windows deepened into a heavy, unbroken slate. I cleared my kitchen island, opening a fresh browser instance secured behind an encrypted virtual private network. Data never lies. Human beings craft elaborate fictions, but their financial footprints always reveal the truth. If my sister and her husband were extracting $2,500 a month from my parents just to survive their polished Bellevue lifestyle was a structural illusion. I intended to find the cracks. I started with the Washington State Department of Revenue database. Greg ran a tech startup called Catalyst Dynamics. He frequently boasted at family holidays about disrupting the logistics sector. I bypassed his flashy corporate website and pulled the underlying state filings for his limited liability corporation. The status text displayed in stark red font: inactive, administrative dissolution. The state had revoked their operating privileges 6 months ago for failure to file annual reports and pay basic licensing fees. Catalyst Dynamics was dead. I needed qualitative context to accompany the raw data. I picked up my smartphone and dialed Marcus. We crossed paths during a severe data migration project 2 years ago. He now worked as a senior risk assessor for a prominent Seattle venture capital firm, maintaining an encyclopedic knowledge of the local tech ecosystem. He answered on the second ring, the sound of a crowded restaurant in the background. "Avery," he said, his tone warm but rushed. "Tell me, you are calling to accept the infrastructure director position we offered you last quarter." "Not today, Marcus," I replied. "I need a quiet favor. I need a read on Catalyst Dynamics. Greg is my brother-in-law." A heavy pause settled over the line. The background noise seemed to drop away. "Avery," Marcus said, lowering his voice, "that company is a ghost ship. The seed investors walked away last autumn. Greg burned through a substantial amount of capital, attempting to scale a product that never passed beta testing. He is blacklisted at 3 major venture firms. No one is giving him another cent." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. That is exactly what I needed to know. I disconnected the call. The pieces were beginning to align, but a failed startup did not explain the sheer panic I witnessed in my sister the previous night. Entrepreneurs fail every day in Seattle. They liquidate, restructure, and find a mid-level management job. They do not send their wives to scream at relatives in residential lobbies over a car lease. There was another variable in the equation, a persistent leak draining whatever equity they had left. I shifted my focus to physical assets. I accessed a public auction portal used by regional banks to liquidate repossessed collateral. I ran a search querying Greg's full legal name. The system returned a single hit, a photograph loaded on my screen featuring a 24-foot Mastercraft wakeboarding boat. The vessel sported a custom metallic blue hull and premium leather seating. Lauren had posted dozens of pictures lounging on that exact deck last summer, holding a glass of expensive champagne, using hashtags that celebrated the rewards of hard work. The listing details indicated the bank had seized the boat 90 days ago. It was currently sitting in a secured impound lot in Tacoma, awaiting public auction. I stared at the image. The boat was the pebble, the first tangible piece of debris indicating a much larger avalanche. A man does not let his prized recreational vehicle get repossessed unless his primary checking accounts are entirely depleted. If the toys were gone, the shelter was next. I navigated to the King County Recorder website. I typed in the address of their sprawling modern farmhouse in Bellevue. The county property database provides a chronological ledger of every deed lien and legal action tied to a specific parcel of land. The screen populated with a long list of documents. I scrolled past the initial mortgage deed from 4 years ago. I scrolled past a secondary home equity line of credit filed 2 years later. At the very top of the list, filed just 45 days ago, sat a devastating legal instrument. Notice of default. I clicked the link to download the public PDF. The text was dry, legal, and merciless. Greg and Lauren were 6 months behind on their mortgage payments. The bank had officially initiated pre-foreclosure proceedings. If they did not cure the arrears by the end of the quarter, the property would be auctioned on the county courthouse steps. My sister was living in a house she no longer owned. The magnitude of the deception settled over me. Lauren had been lying to the entire family. She attended holiday dinners wearing designer clothes, projecting an aura of effortless wealth, while secretly opening the mail to find final warning notices from debt collectors. But a failed business and a foreclosed home still did not answer the final question. Greg had secured significant venture funding. They possessed substantial equity in the house before taking out the second line of credit. Millions of dollars had flowed through their hands over the past 4 years. Where did the capital go? I opened the Washington State Civil Court docket. I searched Greg's name in the defendant column. 2 active judgments appeared. They were not filed by standard credit card companies or auto lenders. They were filed by a notoriously aggressive collection agency based in Nevada, an entity that primarily serviced high-interest personal loans and casino markers. The final puzzle piece locked into position. Greg was drowning in debt from a hidden gambling addiction. He had likely started sports betting or playing high-stakes tables to chase the losses from his failing startup, a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of success. He wagered their savings, their home equity, and their future. My parents were blindly enabling this disaster. They likely did not know the dark extent of the gambling, but they knew Lauren was desperate for cash. They knew she could not afford the car leases or the private preschool tuition. Instead of forcing Lauren to face reality, Richard and Brenda chose to shield their golden child. They used my empathy as a weapon, inventing a fake pension crisis to siphon my salary. My $2,500 a month was not saving my childhood home. It was paying the minimum interest on Greg's gambling debts. It was keeping the lights on in a foreclosed mansion. By canceling that automated transfer, I had inadvertently pulled the linchpin out of Lauren's fraudulent life. I closed the browser windows one by one. The glowing screen faded, leaving my kitchen bathed in the dim gray light of the evening storm. I faced a profound moral dilemma. I possessed the digital equivalent of a nuclear weapon. I could take the notice of default, the boat repossession, and the casino debt judgments, and I could publish them directly beneath my mother's tearful Facebook post. I could expose Lauren's fake life to every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had spent the morning calling me a selfish monster. I could burn my mother's victim narrative to ash in a matter of seconds. Vengeance is loud. It requires defending your position in the aftermath. It invites more screaming, more tears, and more chaotic family summits. Strategy is quiet. I created a new folder on my encrypted drive. I saved the property records, the auction listing, and the civil judgments. I locked the archive behind a dual authentication password. I chose strategy. I would not expose my sister to the extended family. I would hold the information as leverage, a silent guarantee of my own peace. My parents were desperate. The collapse of their money laundering pipeline was going to push them into dangerous territory. People facing imminent financial ruin rarely accept defeat gracefully. They escalate. They attempt to use fear when guilt fails to yield results. Richard would try to threaten me. He would try to force my hand, relying on his patriarchal authority to intimidate me back into compliance. I closed my laptop and walked over to the kitchen window, watching the city lights flicker to life across the dark water. I welcomed his next move. Let him try to intimidate an architect who already held the blueprints to his destruction. Tuesday morning brought a sharp, biting wind sweeping off Elliott Bay, chilling the downtown technology district. I sat at my workstation on the 42nd floor, finalizing the load balancer configurations for our primary client. My desk phone flashed a red indicator light. It was the lobby security desk. I picked up the receiver. David, our head of corporate security, spoke in a measured, professional tone. He informed me that a man claiming to be my father was pacing in the ground floor public plaza, demanding that I come down immediately. David noted the man seemed highly agitated and offered to have him escorted off the premises. I thanked David for his vigilance. I instructed him to hold his position. I would handle the situation personally. I locked my workstation and walked toward the glass elevators. Descending 42 floors took exactly 40 seconds. During that brief transit, I prepared my mind for a hostile engagement. Desperation breeds predictability. When cornered, manipulative individuals rely on their oldest, most reliable weapons. For my father, that weapon was fear. He operated under the archaic delusion that parental authority superseded legal and financial reality. He was about to learn that in the corporate sector, unearned authority held zero currency. I stepped out of the lobby and passed through the revolving glass doors into the open plaza. The architecture here was unforgiving, defined by sharp angles of brushed steel-gray concrete planters and towering panes of reflective glass. Tech workers in tailored coats hurried past holding insulated coffee cups, their heads down against the wind. Richard stood near a modern water feature, looking entirely out of place. I observed his physical deterioration as I approached. Just 4 days ago at the airport, he projected the effortless arrogance of a wealthy patriarch. Today, his posture was rigid but brittle. He wore a heavy wool trench coat, but his shoulders hunched inward against the cold. His jaw was set in a tight, angry line. The collapse of his hidden revenue stream had aged him overnight. He spotted me walking across the concrete. He did not step forward to greet me. He planted his feet, attempting to establish a dominant territorial stance. I stopped 3 feet away, leaving a deliberate professional distance between us. I did not say hello. I waited for him to initiate the transaction. Richard reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He withdrew a thick manila envelope and thrust it toward my chest. "Take it," he commanded, his voice tight and strained. I did not raise my hands. "What is the nature of this delivery?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. It is a formal demand, Richard sneered, shaking the envelope. You thought you could just cut off your family and walk away without consequences? You thought you were so much smarter than us. You are a selfish, ungrateful child, and you are going to learn that your actions have severe legal repercussions. Open it. I calmly reached out and accepted the envelope. I pulled the flap back and extracted a single stack of paper. The document was stapled in the top left corner, printed on heavy bond paper to simulate official legal stationery. The heading at the top read, "Demand for Repayment," in bold, capitalized letters. I scanned the paragraphs with the detached efficiency of a machine parsing code. The text was filled with pseudo-legal jargon citing fictitious statutes regarding familial obligation. The core argument claimed that I owed my parents a retroactive sum for my college tuition, campus housing, and basic living expenses accumulated over a decade ago. I dropped my gaze to the final paragraph. The document demanded an immediate lump sum payment of $80,000. It further stipulated that if I did not reinstate the $2,500 monthly automated transfers within 48 hours, they would file a lawsuit against me for elder abuse and financial abandonment. The audacity of the fabrication was staggering. It was a calculated intimidation tactic designed to terrorize a younger, weaker version of myself. I looked up from the paper and focused on my father's hands. Richard kept his arms crossed over his chest, but his fingers were gripping the sleeves of his coat with a white-knuckled intensity. A slight rhythmic tremor shook his left hand. His breathing was shallow. He was blinking too fast. This was the pebble, the microscopic flaw in his structural integrity. He knew the document was a worthless prop. He had likely typed it himself on his home computer, downloading a generic template from the internet. He was terrified. He was playing his final card, betting everything on the hope that I was still the compliant, easily frightened girl he raised. I folded the fake legal demand into precise thirds. I unzipped my leather briefcase and slid the document inside, securing it in a side pocket. "You seem remarkably confident for someone who just received a lawsuit," Richard growled, attempting to mask his nervous tremor with a fresh layer of aggression. "Our lawyer is ready to file the paperwork on Friday. We will drag you through the courts. We will garnish your corporate wages. You are going to pay back every cent you owe us." I clasped my hands in front of me. "I am evaluating the logic of your claim," I replied quietly. "You are demanding $80,000 for my university tuition and room and board." "That is correct," he snapped. "That is fascinating," I countered, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. "Because I achieved a national merit designation in high school, I was awarded a full academic grant by the university endowment. My tuition cost you nothing. Furthermore, I worked 20 hours a week at the campus technology help desk to pay for my off-campus apartment and my groceries. You did not contribute a single dollar to my higher education. I possess the historical tax filings, the university billing statements, and my old pay stubs to prove it." Richard shifted his weight. The angry flush on his cheeks began to fade, replaced by an unhealthy pallor. "Let us discuss the second component of your document," I continued, stepping 1/2 pace closer. "You are threatening to file a fraudulent lawsuit specifically designed to cause me reputational and financial harm, unless I surrender money to you. Under the revised Code of Washington State, demanding property or money under the threat of false legal action is not a civil dispute. It is the statutory definition of extortion." Richard opened his mouth, but his vocal cords failed to produce a sound. "Extortion is a felony," I stated, enunciating every syllable with crystal clarity. "You just hand-delivered a written confession of your intent to commit a felony directly to your target." "I am your father," he finally choked out, his voice reduced to a hollow defensive rasp. "No judge would ever listen to you. You are making things up." "I am an architect of digital security," I said. "I do not make things up. I collect data, just like I collected the data on your Bellevue money laundering operation." The remaining color drained entirely from his face. He looked as though I had just struck him with a physical blow. "I know about Greg," I told him, delivering the final, fatal strike to his illusion. "I know Catalyst Dynamics was dissolved by the state. I know the bank repossessed his custom wakeboarding boat. And I know about the Nevada Collection Agency chasing his casino markers. You took my salary, and you funneled it to a gambling addict to protect Lauren from reality." Richard took a stumbling step backward. His eyes darted around the public plaza as if realizing for the first time that we were standing in the middle of a corporate campus, surrounded by witnesses, security cameras, and harsh daylight. "If you ever threaten me with frivolous legal action again," I said, maintaining my quiet, lethal tone, "I will not hire a defense attorney. I will simply forward this printed extortion attempt, along with the complete 60-month ledger of your bank transfers to Greg, directly to the Internal Revenue Service. I am quite certain the federal government will be highly interested in auditing 5 years of undeclared financial gifts distributed to a foreclosed household." The trap he tried to set for me snapped shut around his own throat. He realized he held zero leverage. He possessed no authority. He was simply an aging, desperate man standing in the cold, holding a worthless hand of cards. Richard did not say goodbye. He did not attempt a final insult. He turned around and walked away, his shoulders slumping, his expensive wool coat offering no protection against the freezing reality of his situation. I watched him retreat until he disappeared around the corner of the concrete parking structure. I turned and walked back through the revolving glass doors. The lobby was warm and secure. I had neutralized the immediate threat, but the financial gravity of Greg's gambling debt was an inescapable force. Without my capital to delay the inevitable, Lauren's world was about to collapse inward. The golden child was losing her mansion, and she had only one place left to go. The fallout was going to hit my parents' house like a meteor, and I intended to watch the impact from a very safe distance. 2 weeks had passed since the encounter in the corporate plaza. The Seattle weather shifted into a persistent, biting winter chill. The sun set early in the afternoon, casting long geometric shadows across the hardwood floors of my condo. I spent my evenings enjoying a profound, undisturbed quiet. I reorganized my cloud server architectures. I read thick, hardcover novels. The constant underlying anxiety that used to govern my daily routine dissolved into empty space. I had successfully isolated the infected network nodes. On a Tuesday evening, my smartphone screen illuminated on the kitchen counter. The caller identification displayed my mother's cell phone number. I had previously routed her incoming communications to a silent archive. However, I tracked the King County foreclosure timeline on my personal calendar. Greg and Lauren were rapidly approaching their final eviction deadline. A cold, clinical curiosity prompted me to slide my finger across the glass screen and accept the connection. I did not speak a greeting. I simply held the device to my ear and monitored the transmission. The audio feed presented a chaotic symphony of domestic collapse. Brenda was weeping. The sound lacked her usual manufactured cadence, designed to extract sympathy or retail discounts. This was a ragged, breathless panic. Beneath her crying, I heard the unmistakable sharp, haughty commands of my older sister. Lauren was screaming about the humidity in the spare bedroom, ruining her designer silk blouses. She was demanding that someone carry her matching leather luggage up the narrow staircase. Avery Brenda gasped into the microphone. "Avery, please do not disconnect the line. Greg is gone. He packed a nylon duffel bag and left the house in the middle of the night. He took the last remaining credit card. The bank served the final eviction notice this morning. Lauren had to pack Mia and Leo into a rideshare vehicle and come here. We have nowhere else to put them." I leaned against the marble island, visualizing the scene unfolding in my childhood home. Lauren was 33 years old, a woman who spent the last decade mocking my practical choices and flaunting her apparent wealth. Now, she was squeezing designer dresses into a tiny, dusty closet adorned with faded floral wallpaper. She possessed zero income, zero marketable skills, and a mountain of hidden casino debt left behind by a fleeing husband. Yet, even in the midst of total financial ruin, she prioritized the condition of her luxury garments over the stability of her children. Her pristine Bellevue facade had shattered, leaving behind a terrified, entitled shell, trying to maintain an aura of superiority in a cramped suburban bedroom. The cosmic irony of the situation generated a heavy, palpable force. Just 3 weeks ago, my parents sat across from me in a premium coffee shop. They handed me a $12,000 Hawaiian cruise itinerary. They demanded I take custody of Mia and Leo for 14 days, insisting they deserved a luxurious break from their exhausting lives. They believed my salary was their personal safety net. Now they were permanently trapped. They lost their automated monthly subsidy. They gained 3 permanent dependents. Instead of sipping expensive cocktails on a sun-drenched balcony, my father would spend his retirement driving his grandchildren to public school in a deteriorating sedan. My mother would spend her golden years cooking meals and doing laundry for an adult daughter who still expected to be treated like royalty. They tried to force me into an unpaid temporary babysitting role. The universe responded by handing them a permanent sentence of chaotic, unfunded childcare. "We do not have enough space," Brenda sobbed, pulling my attention back to the current crisis. "Your father is trying to sleep on the living room sofa. The kids are crying. They do not understand why they cannot go back to their big bedrooms. Lauren is falling apart. We cannot survive this reality, Avery. We cannot afford the extra utility costs. We cannot afford the groceries to feed 3 additional mouths." She paused, gathering her breath for the inevitable request. "I need you to reinstate the transfer," she pleaded. "Just a temporary loan, a few $1,000s a month to keep the refrigerator full until Lauren finds a divorce attorney and gets back on her feet. You cannot let your own niece and nephew starve. Please show some compassion." She utilized the children as a blunt instrument, hoping their innocence would breach my defensive perimeter. I stood in my silent kitchen and experienced a genuine painful ache in my chest. Mia was 7, Leo was 5. They did not choose to be born into an ecosystem built on lies and unearned entitlement. They were innocent casualties caught in the blast radius of Greg's gambling addiction and Lauren's vanity. The thought of those kids going to bed hungry sparked a deep biological instinct to protect them. But I am an architect. I understand how systems route resources. If I wired a lump sum of liquid cash to my mother's bank account, those funds would never reach the children's plates. Lauren would intercept the capital to pay her premium cellular bill. She would order expensive takeout meals to maintain her illusion of status. My father would redirect the money to cover his own outstanding debts. Handing cash to Brenda was equivalent to pouring clean water into a toxic well. The children would remain thirsty, and the adults would continue their dysfunction. I took a slow, measured breath. "I am listening to you," I said, keeping my voice level and devoid of any emotional vulnerability. "I hear the distress in your environment, but my position remains unchanged. I will not transfer a single cent of liquid cash to your banking institution. That pipeline is permanently dismantled." Brenda let out a sharp wail. "How can you be so cold?" she demanded. "They are just children." "I will not fund Lauren's denial," I countered smoothly. "I will not subsidize her leather bags or her silk shirts. However, I will ensure the children receive proper nutrition. I am opening a corporate grocery delivery account tonight. I will link it directly to a local supermarket near your address. I will cover the cost of fresh produce, proteins, and basic household necessities. The deliveries will arrive twice a week." I paused to let the strict parameters of the arrangement settle over the cellular line. "Do not attempt to add luxury items, cosmetics, or alcohol to the digital cart," I warned her. "I monitor the itemized receipts on my end. If I detect any purchases unrelated to the direct welfare of Mia and Leo, I will terminate the delivery account immediately. You will receive food for the children. You will receive nothing else." A long, stunned silence stretched across the connection. Brenda realized the gravity of the new paradigm. She could no longer extract untraceable cash. She could no longer exploit my empathy for her own comfort. I had stripped away their financial autonomy and replaced it with a highly regulated, rigid supply chain designed solely to protect the innocent. "Thank you," Brenda whispered, the fight draining from her voice. The single phrase carried the weight of total surrender. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the marble counter. The old system was dead and buried. I had successfully protected the vulnerable nodes while starving the corrupt ones. But my sister was not accustomed to being denied. Lauren operated on decades of unearned privilege. Being forced to eat groceries purchased by the younger sibling she despised would inevitably ignite a bitter, desperate resentment. I knew the fragile truce would not hold for long. Thursday afternoon brought a brief reprieve from the Pacific Northwest rain. The clouds parted, allowing sharp shafts of sunlight to reflect off the cold, dark waters of Elliott Bay. I received a calendar invitation from Aunt Susan earlier that morning. She did not send a casual text message. She issued a formal summons to a high-end seafood grill on the waterfront. Susan viewed herself as the ultimate family diplomat, the supreme arbiter of moral conduct for our entire bloodline. I accepted her invitation because it presented the perfect tactical opportunity. If an engineer wants to distribute a software patch across a vast, decentralized network, they do not install the update on individual devices. They deploy the payload directly to the central server. In our familial ecosystem, Susan functioned as the central server. I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. The dining room smelled of roasted cedarwood and expensive butter. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and sat at a corner booth, positioning myself facing the entrance. Susan arrived exactly on time. She wore a heavy beige trench coat and carried a designer tote bag, her face pulled into a tight expression of solemn duty. She slid into the booth opposite me, offering a stiff, unsmiling nod. A waiter approached our table almost immediately. Susan did not look at the menu. She ordered a glass of imported Pinot Noir, a dozen raw oysters, and the market-price halibut. She handed the leather-bound menu back to the server, shooting a quick, expectant glance at my briefcase. For years, I had quietly absorbed the cost of these extravagant family gatherings. My relatives treated my corporate success as a communal asset, an open tab they could utilize whenever they desired a luxurious meal. I looked at the waiter and ordered a simple black coffee and a small garden salad. Before the beverages even arrived, Susan folded her hands on the crisp white tablecloth and launched into her rehearsed monologue. She came to fix a tragedy. She repeated Brenda's fictitious social media narrative word for word. She spoke about the agonizing pain of aging parents, abandoned by a cruel, unfeeling daughter. She weaponized my financial stability, painting me as a greedy tech worker who hoarded wealth while her own sisters suffered through a difficult transition. "You live alone in that glass tower," Susan scolded, her voice dripping with condescension. "You focus entirely on your career and your bank accounts. You do not understand the daily sacrifices required to maintain a real household. Your mother is devastated. She cries every single day. Lauren is struggling to hold her marriage together. You need to stop this selfish behavior, pay for their ruined vacation, and apologize to your family before you end up dying alone." I did not interrupt her. I did not raise my voice to defend my character. I sipped my black coffee and analyzed her posture. She leaned forward across the table, eager for a reaction. She wanted tears. She wanted a defensive, screaming argument. I let her speak until her chest heaved and she literally ran out of breath. The waiter returned, placing a silver tray of oysters on the table. Susan pierced one with a tiny fork, waiting for my inevitable surrender. I pushed my salad plate aside. I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out my lightweight aluminum laptop. I opened the lid and authenticated my login. "Susan," I said, keeping my vocal tone pitched low and steady to ensure the neighboring tables could not hear our conversation. "You operate under the assumption that my parents are victims of my greed. I prefer to operate using empirical data. I turned the glowing screen toward her. I opened the first digital tab. This is a compiled spreadsheet of my monthly bank transfers, I instructed, pointing to the columns of numbers. Look at the routing digits. I sent Richard and Brenda $150,000 over the last 5 years because they claimed they were losing their home. Susan frowned her eyes, scanning the undeniable math. I clicked to the second tab. This is a public record from the King County Recorder database. I continued my voice, retaining an icy, relentless calm. It displays a notice of default on Greg and Lauren's property in Bellevue. They are currently in pre-foreclosure. The bank repossessed Greg's boat last month. He is drowning in high-interest casino debt. The tiny silver oyster fork slipped from Susan's fingers, clattering loudly against her porcelain plate. My parents were not paying a mortgage, I explained, watching the confusion in her eyes curdle into shock. They laundered my salary directly to Lauren. They funded her designer lifestyle and subsidized a gambling addict. When I terminated the automated transfer, their entire illusion collapsed. Lauren lost her mansion and moved back into her childhood bedroom. I reached into my briefcase one final time. I pulled out the physical manila envelope Richard had delivered to my corporate plaza. I slid the thick paper across the white linen tablecloth. When the free money stopped, Richard tried to terrorize me, I said. "Read it." Susan unfolded the fake legal demand. Her eyes darted across the pseudo-legal jargon. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face a chalky, sickly hue. She recognized her brother-in-law's handwriting on the signature line. She recognized the desperate, transparent attempt at extortion. "They lied to you," I stated, delivering the final blow to her self-righteous crusade. "They lied to the entire family network. Brenda used you to attack me because she knew you would execute her social warfare without questioning the source code. She manipulated your loyalty. She turned you into a weapon to protect her own fraudulent secrets." Susan stared at the extortion document. Her mouth opened, but she could not formulate a single word. The realization of her own gullibility struck her with the force of a physical impact. She had publicly condemned the only honest person in the family, acting as a blind pawn for a pair of financial abusers. The waiter approached our booth carrying a large tray holding the market price halibut. I did not wait for Susan to gather her thoughts or offer an apology. I pulled a $20 bill from my wallet. I placed the crisp currency precisely on the table to cover the cost of my black coffee, my garden salad, and a standard gratuity. "Enjoy the seafood," I told her. I closed my laptop, placed it inside my briefcase, and walked out of the restaurant. I stepped back into the crisp Seattle air, feeling a profound sense of closure. The propagation of truth requires minimal effort once you deliver the payload to the correct node. Within 24 hours, the family ecosystem experienced a vast seismic shift. Susan, mortified by her own foolishness and enraged by Brenda's deception, weaponized her immense gossip network against its creator. She forwarded digital copies of the foreclosure notices to every aunt, uncle, and cousin. She narrated Richard's pathetic extortion attempt during lengthy, dramatic phone calls to the extended relatives on the East Coast. The digital smear campaign evaporated instantly. The sympathetic comments on Brenda's social media posts vanished, replaced by a deafening judgmental silence. The relatives who had texted me vicious insults just a few days prior suddenly sent quiet, awkward apologies. I read their messages and deleted them without replying. Richard and Brenda found themselves entirely cut off from the communal herd. The social isolation they tried to inflict upon me rebounded with devastating precision. They were exposed as grifters, liars, and enablers. They were trapped in a cramped house with a furious, destitute golden child and 2 confused grandchildren stripped of both their stolen funding and their pristine reputation. However, total isolation serves as a dangerous catalyst. A cornered animal will eventually strike out blindly, ignoring all logical boundaries. Deprived of her financial resources and her social support system, my mother's desperation mutated into sheer, unregulated panic. Since she could no longer reach me digitally or socially, she decided to breach my physical perimeter. She was preparing to bring her chaos directly into my professional sanctuary, setting the stage for a spectacular workplace ambush. My corporate campus operated as an impenetrable fortress of modern efficiency. Located in the heart of the Seattle technology sector, the structure utilized biometric access controls, rotating perimeter guards, and multiple layers of encrypted digital gates. I spent my professional life constructing invisible walls to protect sensitive data from malicious external forces. I valued the sterile, predictable nature of this environment. Human volatility possessed zero bandwidth here. Logic governed every interaction. Code dictated every outcome. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the disastrous luncheon with Aunt Susan. The social excommunication of my parents was entirely complete. Stripped of their financial pipeline and their communal audience, they existed in a vacuum of their own making. Lauren was trapped in their cramped suburban house, furious and destitute. The pressure inside their household was undoubtedly reaching critical mass. I was analyzing a latency issue on a secondary European server node when my desk console illuminated. David, the director of ground floor operations, initiated a secure audio link. Avery, he began his tone, projecting a practiced, cautious neutrality. We have an unauthorized visitor in the primary atrium. She claims to be your mother. She is highly distressed and refusing to vacate the premises without speaking to you directly. She is causing a significant disruption among the morning staff arriving for their shifts. I instructed David to provide a live visual feed. A secondary window opened on my curved monitor, displaying the high-resolution output of the lobby surveillance cameras. Brenda stood near the polished titanium turnstiles. She wore a faded raincoat despite the dry weather outside. Her hair was deliberately disheveled. It was an intentional aesthetic designed to communicate profound, unendurable suffering. She wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses to her manufactured martyrdom. She clutched a worn cardboard box against her chest. I directed my mouse to zoom in on the object. The corrugated flaps were folded open, revealing a carefully curated collection of physical memories. I identified a faded patchwork quilt. My grandmother had sewn a silver-framed photograph of me at 7 years old, missing my front teeth, and a stack of handmade greeting cards I had constructed during elementary school art classes. This was her final, desperate maneuver. My mother had exhausted her arsenal of financial extortion and social manipulation. She now attempted to weaponize nostalgia. She brought physical artifacts of my compliant childhood into a rigid corporate setting, hoping to trigger a visceral emotional regression. She anticipated that I would rush downstairs, terrified of professional embarrassment. She calculated that I would surrender to her demands, offer her cash, and beg for her forgiveness, just to end the public spectacle in front of my colleagues. In my early 20s, her calculation would have proven accurate. I would have felt the crushing, suffocating weight of public shame. I would have sacrificed my own boundaries to pacify her erratic behavior, desperate to maintain the illusion of a normal family. But I was no longer the frightened girl desperate for maternal approval. I was an architect. I designed the threat response protocols governing this exact facility. I refused to let a compromised entity breach my secure perimeter. David, I said, keeping my vocal delivery crisp and authoritative. The individual currently occupying the lobby is exhibiting hostile behavior. She is not an authorized guest, nor will she ever receive clearance. Please initiate the standard disturbance protocol for a hostile trespasser. Contact Human Resources to deploy a representative downstairs as an official witness. Have your team escort her off the property immediately. Do not allow her past the security checkpoints under any circumstances. Understood, David replied without hesitation. The audio link disconnected with a soft click. I stood up from my ergonomic workstation. My corner office featured an interior transparent partition overlooking the expansive multi-story atrium below. I walked to the edge of the glass and looked down at the ground floor, maintaining a steep, detached vantage point, 40 levels above the confrontation. I became a silent overseer, watching the microscopic movements of the figures below. 2 uniformed guards approached Brenda. A human resources manager flanked them, holding a digital tablet to record the incident. They formed a solid, unyielding physical barrier between my mother and the secure elevator banks. I could not hear the dialogue through the soundproof architectural glass, but the surveillance feed on my monitor and the live view below provided a comprehensive, silent narrative of the event. Brenda realized her tactic was failing. I was not rushing down to save her. I was not caving to the intense pressure of corporate humiliation. The guards maintained their professional distance, offering her no emotional reaction to feed upon. Frustrated by their stoicism, she dropped the cardboard box. The childhood artifacts spilled violently across the pristine granite floor. The patchwork quilt unfolded like a surrendered flag. The silver frame shattered into dozens of glittering shards. She threw her hands in the air, her face contorting into a mask of unfiltered primal rage. Passers-by holding insulated coffee cups stopped to stare, their expressions caught between alarm and pity. My mother shrieked, pointing upward toward the tiered levels of the building, blindly searching the thousands of windows for my face. I stood perfectly still. I offered no wave. I offered no signal. I merely observed her chaos with the cold curiosity of a scientist studying a dying organism. The guard stepped forward, employing practiced de-escalation maneuvers. They gestured firmly toward the revolving exit doors. When she refused to move, they flanked her, using their physical presence to herd her backward. She fought against their polite but relentless direction. She dug her heels into the polished stone, an aging woman stripped of her dignity, fighting a completely losing battle against a systemic apparatus she could not manipulate with tears. The heavy glass doors eventually absorbed her exit, spitting her out onto the cold concrete plaza. A maintenance worker quietly appeared from a utility corridor, carrying a broom and a dustpan. He swept up the scattered childhood artifacts, depositing the weaponized nostalgia into a gray plastic disposal bin. The shattered frame, the elementary school cards, and the quilt disappeared into the trash. The lobby returned to its normal humming efficiency within 90 seconds. The disruption was neutralized. The breach was sealed. I placed my palm flat against the cool surface of my office wall. The physical boundary separating us mirrored the permanent psychological barrier I had successfully constructed within my own mind. By refusing to engage in her public spectacle, I stripped my mother of her ultimate weapon. Emotional terrorism relies entirely on the active participation of the victim. It requires an audience willing to absorb the inflicted shame. When you refuse to step onto the battlefield, the terrorist simply screams into an empty void. My internal transformation was absolute. I no longer feared her tantrums. I no longer feared the judgment of my peers. My independent life provided a physical and systemic fortress that her dysfunction could never penetrate. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. The aggressive attacks were officially over. My parents had exhausted their entire offensive arsenal. There were no more relatives to manipulate, no more fraudulent lawsuits to file, and no more workplaces to ambush. Now, the adrenaline of the conflict would inevitably fade, leaving Richard and Brenda alone in a cramped, hostile household. They were about to face the crushing, inescapable mathematics of their own financial ruin. I could picture the exact environment inside my childhood home with perfect clarity. The 4-bedroom suburban split level was never designed to sustain a multi-generational crisis. The architecture of the house promoted a quiet, isolated retirement. Now it functioned as a high-pressure containment vessel. The walls echoed with the relentless sounds of a shattered family. Mia and Leo cried out of confusion, missing their spacious playrooms and their predictable routines. Lauren paced the narrow hallways, snapping at anyone who crossed her path, projecting her profound humiliation onto her aging parents. Brenda likely retreated into silence, paralyzed by the loss of her social standing and her financial security. At the center of this collapsing ecosystem sat my father. Richard occupied the head of the heavy oak dining table. For decades, he used that specific chair as a throne to deliver booming lectures on fiscal responsibility and the virtues of hard work. He loved spreading his bank statements across the polished wood, boasting about his immaculate credit score and his disciplined budgeting skills. He built his entire identity around the illusion of being a wise, infallible patriarch. Tonight, the documents scattered across the oak table told a different story. Richard stared at a stack of printed utility bills. The heating surcharge for the drafty house had doubled. The water bill spiked due to the extra laundry generated by 3 additional residents. A bright pink final notice rested near his right hand, indicating an overdue property tax installment. In previous months, my automated deposit would have neutralized these threats before they ever materialized into paper warnings. He would have paid the balances, filed the receipts, and continued his comfortable existence. Without my capital injection, the simple arithmetic became a death sentence. The incoming pension funds could not cover the outgoing expenses. Every day they remained in that house, the deficit grew wider. The margin for error no longer existed. At 7 o'clock in the evening, my smartphone illuminated on my glass coffee table. I was sitting on my sofa, reviewing a technical manual for a new encryption protocol. I glanced at the screen. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I did not silence the device. I let it ring until the automated voicemail system engaged. 10 minutes later, a notification appeared. I tapped the screen and listened to the audio recording. The voice that transmitted through the speaker did not belong to the arrogant man who had handed me a fake extortion document in a corporate plaza just weeks prior. Richard sounded hollow. The rich, booming timbre of his vocal delivery had withered into a thin, breathless rasp. The fight had drained out of him, leaving behind a terrified, aging man staring into an abyss. Avery, he began pausing to clear a thick obstruction in his throat. Avery, I know you are listening. I know you will not answer. I am calling because we are out of options. The checking account is overdrawn. The tax assessment is due on Friday. We cannot pay the mortgage this month. We are going to lose the house. He let out a long, ragged sigh. The sound of a child crying echoed faintly in the background. I do not know how to fix this, Richard confessed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The savings are gone. We spent everything trying to keep Lauren afloat. We made a mistake. We made so many mistakes. I am asking you hypothetically what we should do. How do we survive this situation? Please, Avery, just tell me what to do. The audio file ended with a soft click. I set the phone down. I experienced no gloating triumph. I felt no surge of vindictive joy. A systemic failure is simply a mathematical certainty. When a structure is built on a foundation of deception and unearned extraction, a collapse is inevitable. My father was finally asking for genuine guidance, but he was still operating under a lingering, desperate hope. He framed his question as a request for advice, but his underlying intent was to extract a financial rescue. He hoped that by admitting defeat, he would trigger my filial pity. He hoped I would open my checkbook to save the family home. I stood up and walked to my home office. I woke my desktop computer and opened a blank text document. I did not owe them a response. The easiest path involved deleting the voicemail and maintaining my silence. However, an architect does not abandon a ruined site without leaving a blueprint for demolition. They asked for a solution. I intended to provide one. I would deliver a logical, unsentimental restructuring plan designed to force them into reality. I typed a concise, highly structured email. I addressed it jointly to Richard and Brenda. I utilized the clinical, professional formatting I reserved for enterprise client reports. I did not include a greeting or an expression of sympathy. I proceeded directly to the actionable directives. Step 1, I wrote. You must list the property for sale immediately. Delaying the sale will result in a bank foreclosure, which will destroy your remaining credit equity. The current residential housing market in your sector is highly favorable. A rapid sale will yield a specific margin of equity. You will utilize this margin to clear your immediate outstanding debts and secure alternative housing. You cannot afford to maintain a 4-bedroom suburban property. Clinging to the house is a sentimental error that will result in total bankruptcy. I moved to the next paragraph, establishing the parameters of their new geographic reality. Step 2. You will downsize to a rented duplex in Pierce County or Snohomish County. The cost of living in those municipalities is significantly lower than your current location. A shared wall structure will reduce your utility expenditures. You will consolidate your vehicles, selling any car that carries a monthly lease payment. You must adapt to a strict minimal operational budget. I paused, resting my fingers on the mechanical keyboard. The final directive required a brutal honesty regarding the golden child. Step 3, I continued. Lauren must secure immediate employment. Her prolonged absence from the workforce limits her professional options. She will need to seek entry-level positions in retail, hospitality, or administrative support. She possesses no leverage to decline shift work. She must generate a reliable income stream to contribute to the household resources and support her children. Her designer assets must be liquidated through online consignment portals to generate emergency liquid capital. The era of subsidized leisure is officially terminated. I reviewed the text. The advice was flawless. It offered a clear, survivable path out of their crisis. It was also entirely devoid of the one element they truly desired. I offered them systemic architecture, but I offered them zero capital. I attached the contact information for a ruthless, highly efficient real estate agent I knew through my corporate network. I appended a link to a regional job board for Lauren. I clicked send. The data packets traveled across the network, delivering the cold, undeniable truth directly to their glowing screens. I sat back in my chair and observed the dark Seattle skyline through my window. I knew exactly what would happen when they read the transmission. Richard and Brenda would stare at the stark, bulleted list. The final remnants of their parental authority would disintegrate. They would realize that I was no longer their compliant child waiting for their commands. I was an independent architect who had redesigned the fundamental dynamics of our family without their consent. They would sell the house. They would move to a cheaper county. They would force Lauren to stand behind a cash register. They would execute my plan because they possessed zero alternative options. The hierarchy was permanently inverted. I dictated the structure, and they were forced to inhabit the rigid, unforgiving reality I designed. This profound shift in power would eventually break my sister, pushing her toward a desperate, humbling surrender. The golden child was about to learn the true cost of her own survival. The rusted industrial towers of Gasworks Park cast long, jagged shadows across the damp grass. I sat on a weathered wooden bench facing Lake Union, watching a white seaplane carve a smooth path across the gray water. The crisp December wind carried the distinct scent of aviation fuel and wet pine needles. I wore a heavy wool trench coat, my hands tucked deep into the pockets, observing the Seattle skyline rising on the opposite shore. 6 weeks had elapsed since I transmitted the restructuring email to my parents. The systemic changes I mandated were currently in full effect. They had listed the suburban house. The bank had forced the sale of Lauren's Bellevue mansion. The entire family unit had relocated into a cramped, rented duplex in Snohomish County. The structural hierarchy was permanently altered. My smartphone vibrated 2 days ago with an unexpected text message. The sender was my sister. She did not issue a demand. She did not utilize guilt. She simply asked if I possessed an hour of free time to meet in a neutral public location. I agreed, selecting this park because it offered open space and 0 enclosed corners. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind my bench. I turned my head. Lauren approached slowly, her posture entirely transformed. The proud, aggressive strut of the Bellevue socialite was gone. She walked with the heavy, dragging gait of a woman carrying a physical and psychological burden. She wore a plain black winter parka and faded denim jeans. My analytical gaze immediately dropped to her footwear. This was the defining visual metric of her collapse. For a decade, my sister never left her house in anything less than designer leather heels or premium imported boots. Today, she wore practical, heavily cushioned athletic sneakers. The white foam soles were scuffed with gray dirt. They were the shoes of a retail floor worker, someone who spent 8 hours a day standing on hard concrete, scanning barcodes and folding inventory. Her ego was shattered, replaced by the harsh friction of minimum wage labor. She reached the bench and hesitated, unsure of her welcome. I offered a brief nod, gesturing to the empty wooden slats beside me. Lauren sat down, keeping a cautious distance between us. She stared out at the water, her hands resting in her lap. Her fingernails were unpolished, trimmed short, a stark contrast to her previous immaculate manicures. "I am working at a department store in the mall," Lauren said quietly, offering the information without prompting. "I manage the women's clearance section. My shift starts at 5 in the morning. I spend my days sorting through discarded sweaters and dealing with angry customers demanding expired discounts." I listened, maintaining my neutral expression. I did not offer pity. "My feet hurt constantly," she continued, a bitter, self-deprecating chuckle escaping her lips. "I used to mock people who wore these shoes. I thought I was superior because Greg bought me imported leather. I did not realize my entire life was constructed on a foundation of quicksand." She turned to face me. The dark circles under her eyes revealed weeks of chronic sleep deprivation. "I owe you a profound apology, Avery," she stated, her voice steady but laced with raw exhaustion. "I resented your independence. I resented the fact that you built a stable, secure reality while I was drowning in Greg's lies. I knew Mom and Dad were routing your money to me. I knew it was wrong, but I was terrified of losing my status, so I let them bleed you dry to fund my denial. I allowed them to treat you like a machine, so I could pretend to be a queen. I am sorry." I analyzed her confession. The words lacked the manipulative cadence our mother always utilized. Lauren was speaking from a place of genuine, painful clarity. The crucible of retail labor and cramped living conditions had burned away her artificial vanity. "I appreciate your honesty," I replied, my tone measured and calm. "I validate the severe stress you are currently navigating. Transitioning from subsidized luxury to self-reliance is a brutal process. However, recognizing the exploitation does not erase the historical damage. The previous dynamic is permanently dismantled. We will never resume our old roles." "I know," Lauren whispered, dropping her gaze back to her scuffed sneakers. "I am not asking for your money. I am barely covering my portion of the duplex utility bills. Mom and Dad resent my presence. They complain about the cost of feeding Mia and Leo. The grocery deliveries you set up are the only reason my children have fresh produce. I just wanted to look you in the eye and admit my own guilt." I unbuttoned my wool coat and reached into the interior pocket. I extracted a crisp white envelope and held it out toward her. Lauren flinched slightly, conditioned to expect a legal threat or a billing statement. She reached out with trembling fingers and accepted the paper. "Open it," I instructed. She lifted the unsealed flap and pulled out a single sheet of heavy stock paper. It was a formal financial declaration from a prominent wealth management firm in downtown Seattle. She scanned the text, her brow furrowing in confusion. "That is a confirmation of a direct 529 education trust," I explained, keeping my voice clinical and precise. "I established the account yesterday morning. I deposited a substantial initial principal, and I have configured a recurring annual contribution. The beneficiaries are Mia and Leo. Lauren stared at the document, her mouth parting in silent shock. Let me be entirely clear regarding the architecture of this trust. I continued establishing the unyielding parameters. The funds are managed by a third-party fiduciary. The capital is legally locked. It can only be dispersed directly to accredited educational institutions to cover university tuition, textbooks, and campus housing. I leaned slightly closer, ensuring she absorbed the most critical variable. You possess 0 administrative access to this account. Richard and Brenda possess 0 administrative access. The fiduciary will reject any withdrawal request that does not originate from a verified university billing department. Lauren read the balance printed at the bottom of the page. A tear spilled over her lower lash line, cutting a track down her pale cheek. You cannot touch this money, I reiterated. You cannot use it to pay off Greg's gambling debts. You cannot use it to buy a reliable vehicle or secure a better apartment. This capital is a protective firewall built exclusively for the next generation. I am ensuring that your children will not inherit your financial trauma. When they turn 18, their education is fully guaranteed. My sister folded the document with extreme care, treating the heavy stock paper like a fragile, sacred artifact. She pressed the envelope against her chest. She did not attempt to hug me. She understood that our relationship was no longer built on emotional intimacy. We had transitioned into a cold, functional reality where I protected the innocent nodes of our family tree while demanding absolute accountability from the adults. Thank you, Avery, Lauren cried, her shoulders shaking with genuine, unfiltered gratitude. You are securing their future. I do not deserve this grace, but I will never forget it. We sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the rhythmic lapping of the lake water against the concrete retaining wall. The toxic sibling rivalry that poisoned our childhood was officially diffused. Lauren accepted her new reality. She accepted my boundaries. However, as she wiped her eyes and prepared to stand up, a dark shadow crossed her exhausted features. She zipped her winter parka against the biting wind. I need to warn you about Dad, Lauren said, her voice dropping to a cautious, urgent whisper. I narrowed my eyes, assessing her shift in tone. Proceed. He is not adapting to the duplex, she explained, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if Richard might be watching from the distant parking lot. Mom is depressed, but Dad is acting erratic. He paces the floor late at night. He is obsessing over the incoming mail. Yesterday, I found him digging through a box of old tax documents from the Bellevue house. He was scribbling your social security number on a legal pad. A sharp electric jolt of adrenaline spiked in my chest. When I asked him what he was doing, he snapped at me, Lauren continued. He said he found a loophole. He said he was going to secure a bridge loan to get us out of the rental property, but no bank will lend him a single dollar with his current credit score. I processed the data instantly. My father, stripped of his unearned revenue and desperate to reclaim his patriarchal authority, was preparing to bypass my defensive perimeter using the most dangerous method possible. If he possessed my Social Security identifier and my historical financial data, he was not looking for a loophole. He was preparing to commit federal identity theft. Thank you for the intelligence, Lauren, I said, my voice turning to ice. Focus on your retail shifts. I will handle Richard. We parted ways on the gravel path. Lauren walked toward the bus stop, carrying the promise of her children's future in her pocket. I walked toward my secure vehicle, my mind already racing through threat mitigation protocols. My father believed he could quietly forge my signature to secure a high-interest loan, assuming I would remain ignorant until the cash was safely in his hands. He severely underestimated the digital tripwires surrounding my identity. The final, explosive confrontation was imminent, and I intended to let him spring his own trap. The architecture of a secure digital environment relies on anticipation. A poorly designed system reacts to a breach after the damage occurs. A masterfully designed system identifies the hostile intent before the perimeter is even tested. I spent my entire professional career anticipating catastrophic failures. My personal network was fortified with the exact same enterprise-level monitoring protocols I utilized for global logistics firms. It was a Thursday afternoon. I sat in my home office reviewing a complex server schematic. The Pacific Northwest sky was a bruised, heavy purple, threatening a winter downpour. The silence of my condo was absolute. Then, my secondary monitor flashed a solid, blinding crimson. It was not a standard email notification. It was a primary tier security alert, generated by a custom script I integrated directly into my personal identity matrix. The code monitored my Social Security identifier, my credit profiles, and my tax records across all 3 major financial bureaus simultaneously. I directed my cursor to the flashing icon and expanded the diagnostic window. A hard credit inquiry had just been initiated. The request originated from a predatory lending agency based in Delaware, an institution notorious for issuing high-interest personal loans with minimal income verification. The application requested a liquid disbursement of $50,000. I parsed the metadata attached to the digital application. The hostile actor submitted my exact Social Security digits, my correct date of birth, and my full legal name. However, they made a critical, arrogant error. The application listed my residential location as a specific apartment complex in the University District. It was an address I vacated 8 years ago during my undergraduate studies. I stared at the archaic address, dissecting the logic behind the mistake. Richard believed he was executing a flawless maneuver. He assumed that by utilizing an outdated physical location, any mailed confirmation documents or physical bank notices would bypass my current secure condominium. He intended to intercept the digital wire transfer, secure the $50,000, and vanish the evidence before a billing statement ever reached my mailbox. He thought he was being remarkably clever. He possessed absolutely no comprehension of how modern financial architecture actually functions. He triggered a silent alarm the millisecond he submitted the digital form. I did not panic. Adrenaline is a useless commodity during a systemic breach. I executed my defense protocols with cold, mechanical precision. I opened my encrypted credential vault and authenticated my direct access to the credit bureaus. I initiated a comprehensive permanent freeze on my identity across all platforms. I severed his ability to open any further accounts. Next, I located the emergency fraud contact number for the Delaware lending agency. I initiated a recorded telephone call. I provided my verified identification parameters to their security director. I informed them that the pending $50,000 application was a fraudulent submission originating from a stolen identity. The director halted the underwriting process immediately. The entire sequence from the initial crimson flash on my monitor to the definitive cancellation of the fraudulent loan took precisely 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Richard's desperate gamble was completely neutralized. Not a single dollar was issued. I exported the application metadata, the timestamps, and the agency fraud alerts into a comprehensive PDF document. I routed the file to my high-speed laser printer. The machine hummed, producing 5 pages of undeniable, legally binding evidence. I collected the warm paper, placed it inside a rigid manila folder, and retrieved my car keys. The drive to Snohomish County required 45 minutes of navigating heavy highway traffic. The transition from the gleaming corporate towers of Seattle to the fading gray suburban sprawl of the outer counties mirrored the trajectory of my family. I turned onto a narrow residential street lined with identical deteriorating duplexes. The architecture here was depressing, characterized by peeling paint, cracked concrete driveways, and dying lawns. I parked my vehicle across the street from the address Lauren had provided. I observed the structure. The windows were shut tight against the cold. A single dim light burned in the front room. It was a cage of their own making. I walked up the fractured concrete path. I did not bother knocking on the front door. I tested the handle. It was unlocked, a testament to their lingering, careless Bellevue habits. I pushed the door open and stepped into the cramped living space. The interior smelled of stale cooking oil and damp carpet. The living room was cluttered with mismatched furniture and cardboard boxes they had not bothered to unpack. Brenda sat on a sagging floral sofa, staring blankly at a muted television screen. Richard paced the narrow strip of linoleum connecting the kitchen to the living area. He clutched his smartphone, his eyes darting to the screen every few seconds. He was waiting for a deposit notification that would never arrive. The heavy thud of the front door closing behind me shattered the silence. Brenda gasped, clutching her chest. Richard spun around, his smartphone slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the cheap linoleum floor. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving a sickly ashen gray. He looked at me, then looked at the rigid manila folder in my hand. His primal instincts recognized the immediate danger. "You cannot just walk into our home," Richard stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of sudden terror. I walked past the living room and stepped into the center of the cramped kitchen. I placed the manila folder on the scratched laminate dining table. I flipped the cover open, exposing the printed fraud alerts. "I suggest you sit down," I stated, my voice echoing with a low, unyielding resonance. Richard did not move. His eyes remained locked on the paperwork. Brenda slowly pushed herself off the sofa and shuffled into the kitchen, drawn by the gravitational pull of the conflict. $50,000, I said, maintaining my icy composure. "You applied for a $50,000 high-interest loan at 2 o'clock this afternoon. You utilized my Social Security identifier. You submitted my legal name. You inputted an old college address, assuming the geographical discrepancy would hide the resulting paper trail." Brenda looked at her husband, her face contorting in genuine horror. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" "He tried to steal $50,000 to fund your denial," I answered for him. Richard stepped backward until his spine collided with the refrigerator. "It was a mistake," he choked out, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed a bridge loan to get us out of this horrible duplex. I was going to manage the monthly installments. You have so much credit equity. You would have never even noticed the inquiry." "I am a cloud systems architect," I corrected him, stepping closer to the laminate table. "My personal network is fortified with elite-level identity monitoring. I received a primary security alert the millisecond you clicked submit. I froze my credit profiles before the lending agency could even verify your IP address. I contacted their fraud department and terminated the transaction. The loan is canceled." Richard let out a ragged, wheezing breath, sliding down slightly against the appliance. The realization that his desperate scheme had failed completely paralyzed him. "You do not seem to comprehend the severity of your actions." I continued my delivery, devoid of any familial warmth. "You did not make a financial mistake. You did not execute a clever loophole. You submitted false data across state lines to secure funds from a commercial lending institution. That is the statutory definition of federal wire fraud." Brenda began to cry, burying her face in her hands. "Furthermore," I added, ensuring every syllable landed with devastating precision, "you knowingly utilized my protected identification digits without my authorized consent. That is felony identity theft. You did not just risk bankruptcy today. You actively volunteered for a federal prison sentence." The absolute terrifying reality of my preparedness crushed the remaining air out of the room. Richard clamped his hands over his face, weeping openly. The arrogant patriarch who had spent his entire life bullying his children and demanding unearned respect was reduced to a sobbing, pathetic shell. The depth of their depravity was finally matched by the impenetrable, flawless architecture of my defense. They were completely at my mercy. Richard remained slumped against the kitchen refrigerator. His shoulders heaved with ragged, uncontrollable sobs. Brenda buried her face in her hands, her tears soaking into her sleeves. The cramped kitchen of the Snohomish County duplex felt suffocating, filled with the undeniable weight of their guilt. I stood near the scratched laminate table, watching their distress. I felt no pity. Pity is a vulnerability. When you engineer a secure system, you do not feel sorry for the malware you quarantine. You simply isolate the threat and proceed with your security protocols. I let them cry for 3 full minutes. I wanted the fear to settle deep into their bones. I wanted the reality of federal prison to map a permanent neural pathway in their minds. Once their weeping reduced to quiet, exhausted hiccups, I delivered my final set of instructions. I am not contacting the federal authorities today, I stated. My voice cut through the stagnant air of the kitchen, cold and precise. I am not dispatching the local police to this residence. You will not be arrested this afternoon. Richard lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen. A pathetic glimmer of hope flickered across his face. He believed I was offering forgiveness. He still thought the underlying bond of biological family would shield him from the consequences of his actions. I extinguished that hope instantly. Do not mistake my pragmatism for mercy, I warned him. A federal investigation requires depositions, court appearances, and endless legal meetings. I refuse to surrender another hour of my life to your dysfunction. However, the documentation resting on this table is merely a copy. The original metadata files, the lending agency fraud alerts, and the time-stamped applications are currently secured in a digital vault managed by my retaining attorney. I placed my hands on the back of a cheap dining chair. I am establishing a permanent contingency plan, I explained. Those files will remain in my legal counsel's possession. They represent a permanent guillotine hanging directly over your neck. The blade drops on one strict condition. You are to never contact me again. Brenda lowered her hands, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I defined the unyielding parameters of their exile. You will not call my personal device, I instructed. You will not send text messages. You will not draft emails. You will not attempt to send physical letters to my residential building or my corporate office. You will not ask Lauren or Aunt Susan to pass along a message. If you attempt to breach my perimeter in any capacity for any reason, my attorney has standing orders to forward the fraud dossier directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I paused, ensuring the gravity of the ultimatum anchored itself in their minds. If I hear your voice again, Richard, you will spend your retirement in a federal penitentiary. Do you comprehend the architecture of this agreement? Richard swallowed hard. He looked at the printed evidence on the table. He looked at his weeping wife. He turned his gaze back to me and offered a slow, defeated nod. I understand, he whispered. I did not require an apology. An apology implies a desire for reconciliation. I desired only silence. I turned away from the laminate table and walked toward the front door. I did not look back. I stepped out of the duplex and pulled the door shut behind me. The cold winter wind hit my face the moment I stepped onto the cracked concrete path. I walked to my parked vehicle and unlocked the doors. I sat in the driver's seat, enveloped by the quiet luxury of the leather interior. I retrieved my smartphone from my coat pocket. I opened my contact list. I navigated to my mother's profile. I tapped the screen and selected the block contact option. I repeated the exact procedure for my father. I executed the same action for my sister. This was the final digital severance. The action required less than 10 seconds, but it represented the culmination of a lifelong struggle. The invisible tethers connecting me to their entitlement dissolved into the digital ether. The screen went dark. The hardware felt lighter in my hand. I knew Lauren was still working her early morning shifts at the retail department store. I knew Mia and Leo were attending their new public school. The corporate grocery delivery service remained active, ensuring the children received adequate, healthy nutrition. The educational trust fund sat securely in the hands of the third-party fiduciary, silently compounding interest for their future college tuition. I protected the innocent variables in the equation while neutralizing the hostile actors. My obligations were officially fulfilled. I started the engine and drove away from the decaying suburban neighborhood, steering my vehicle back toward the clean, logical structures of the Seattle skyline. The story of my biological family ended in that dreary duplex, but my own narrative continued to expand. By the time November arrived, the lingering shadows of their dysfunction were entirely eradicated. It was the third week of the month. Thanksgiving Thursday descended upon the Pacific Northwest with a fierce, driving rainstorm. Inside my high-rise condominium, the environment was warm, vibrant, and filled with genuine gratitude. I spent the afternoon preparing a lavish holiday dinner. The kitchen island was covered with platters of roasted vegetables, garlic mashed potatoes, and a perfectly glazed turkey. The air smelled of rich herbs, fresh sage, and baking bread. The ambient lighting cast a soft golden glow across the polished concrete floors. I was not hosting relatives who viewed me as a profitable asset. I was hosting my chosen family. Marcus, from the venture capital firm, stood in my kitchen pouring imported wine and sharing stories about his recent travels. Sarah, a brilliant software developer from my corporate team, sat at the dining table laughing at a joke told by my neighbor. These were individuals who respected my boundaries. They valued my intellect, my company, and my character. They did not arrive at my home expecting me to fund their extravagant lifestyles. They brought side dishes, excellent beverages, and authentic affection. We shared a meal, devoid of passive insults and manufactured drama. No one demanded a loan. No one complained about their lack of luxury items. We simply enjoyed the privilege of each other's company. The contrast between this gathering and the miserable holidays of my past was staggering. I realized that family is not a biological mandate. Family is an architecture you construct yourself, built on a solid foundation of mutual respect and reciprocal care. As the dinner progressed into the late evening, the noise level in the living room rose with joyful conversation. I excused myself from the dining area and walked toward the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the western horizon. I held a glass of sparkling water, enjoying a rare moment of profound stillness. The relentless storm that battered the city all afternoon was finally breaking. The dense gray clouds parted, revealing the deep indigo canvas of the night sky. The rain slowed to a gentle mist, and the city lights of Seattle glittered against the dark expanse of Puget Sound. The glowing commuter ferries cut their smooth paths across the water, operating on precise, reliable schedules. I looked out over the sprawling metropolis. The city operated as a vast, interconnected network, a testament to human engineering and logical design. My own life now mirrored that same resilience. I had lost my biological family, but the loss did not resemble a tragedy. It resembled a necessary system upgrade. I shed the corrupted code that drained my resources and threatened my stability. I preserved my dignity. I secured my financial future. I protected my sanity. I did not win my freedom by engaging in emotional screaming matches or seeking petty, vindictive revenge. Vengeance is a chaotic emotion that inevitably consumes the host. I won by auditing my own life. I identified the toxic nodes. I closed the vulnerabilities. I permanently revoked their access to my resources. The quiet courage of self-reliance stands triumphant. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the undeniable peace of an uncompromised existence. The system was secure. The perimeter was safe. I turned away from the glass window and walked back toward the warmth and laughter of my true home. The traditional American family is often idealized as a sanctuary, a secure harbor shielding its members from the relentless demands of the outside world. We are taught to revere the dining room table as a place of communion where unconditional love is freely given and legacy is passed down from one generation to the next. Yet, as the story of Avery and her family vividly illustrates, the architecture of a family can easily become corrupted. When the foundational pillars of honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness are replaced by entitlement, materialism, and manipulation, the home ceases to be a sanctuary. it becomes a system of extraction. Through the devastating collapse of Avery's family, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about parenting, responsibility, and the spiritual decay that often hides behind the pristine facades of modern American society. For parents navigating the complexities of raising children in today's hyper-competitive culture, the narrative serves as a stark, urgent warning against the trap of transactional love. In the pursuit of maintaining a comfortable lifestyle or projecting an image of success, it is dangerously easy to begin viewing children not as autonomous souls, but as extensions of the parental ego. Avery's parents fell into the most toxic iteration of this dynamic. They crippled their eldest daughter, Lauren, by enabling her destructive vanity, shielding her from the natural consequences of her choices. By constantly cushioning her falls with unearned resources, they denied her the opportunity to develop true resilience. Conversely, they exploited their youngest daughter, treating Avery's independence and quiet competence not as virtues to be celebrated, but as a surplus to be harvested. True parental responsibility demands fairness and emotional awareness. It requires the courage to enforce boundaries, to say no to a child's superficial desires, so they might develop the strength to navigate life's inevitable hardships. When parents lack this emotional honesty, they inadvertently create an ecosystem where the weak remain forever dependent and the strong are punished for their capability. The greatest gift a parent can offer a child is not a subsidized lifestyle or an imported car, but the ethical grounding to stand on their own 2 feet. From the quiet, reflective vantage point of a spiritual practitioner, one who seeks the cultivation of the self, this family's tragedy is a reflection of a much broader societal illness. Modern culture is deeply intoxicated by materialism. We measure a person's worth by their zip code, the brand of their luggage, and the prestige of their vacations. This relentless outward grasping blinds us to the necessity of inner cultivation. In Eastern spiritual philosophy, a meaningful life is built upon a tripod of core virtues: wisdom, tritwe, moral integrity, dauduk, and willpower or fortitude, nitluk. Avery's parents lacked all 3. They lacked the wisdom to see the destructive nature of Greg's gambling and Lauren's vanity. They lacked the moral integrity to live within their own means, choosing instead to steal and extort. And they lacked the willpower to face their financial reality with dignity. When individuals fail to cultivate their inner spiritual landscape, they become hollow. To fill that echoing void, they become emotional vampires, draining the vitality resources and peace of those around them. The spiritual lesson here is profound. If we do not actively engage in the hard, quiet work of repairing our own flaws and cultivating our own inner peace, we will inevitably project our chaos onto the people we are supposed to love the most. For the younger generation, for the young adults striving to build their own lives while carrying the heavy expectations of their upbringing, Avery's journey offers a masterclass in profound self-preservation. Society often burdens the young with an overwhelming sense of obligation, weaponizing the concept of filial piety to demand endless sacrifices. But Avery's story teaches us that true wisdom involves recognizing when a system is fundamentally broken. It requires immense ethical clarity to understand that you are not responsible for saving adults from the consequences of their own deception. And most importantly, it requires extraordinary willpower, niluk, to draw a hard line in the sand and refuse to be consumed by the dysfunction of your origins. Setting a boundary against your own blood is an agonizing process. It goes against every biological and social instinct we possess. Yet the young must realize that establishing independence is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. You cannot heal a toxic family by bleeding yourself dry to water their illusions. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for a sick ecosystem is to remove your energy from it, forcing the inhabitants to finally confront their own reality. Avery did not scream. She did not seek petty revenge. She simply utilized her wisdom to see the truth. her morality to protect the innocent children, and her willpower to walk away. If you find yourself standing in the shadows of a family dynamic that demands your sanity in exchange for conditional acceptance, know that you have the power to redesign your own architecture. There is a quiet courage in auditing the systems you were born into and choosing to permanently revoke access to those who do you harm. To hear more true stories of resilience, quiet victories, and the exact moment someone finally unplugs a toxic family system, be sure to subscribe to Morning Revenge. Join us as we explore the profound strength it takes to build a life on your own terms. As we reflect on the wreckage of the Gemma family, we are left to ponder the conventional wisdom that has guided familial duty for generations. We are endlessly taught that holding a family together, sacrificing our own peace to maintain the unity of the bloodline, is the ultimate moral imperative. We are told that forgiveness is the highest virtue, and that family is the one sanctuary we must preserve at all costs. But perhaps this is the greatest lie we tell ourselves to avoid the terror of standing alone. The truth is that unconditional love does not mean unconditional access. The most profound, spiritually elevated act of love you can offer a deeply toxic family is not to save them, but to let them fall completely apart. It is only when the artificial structures of entitlement and manipulation are allowed to shatter against the cold, hard floor of reality that true transformation can begin. We believe that walking away is a failure of love, but sometimes becoming the villain in their story is the only way to become the hero of your own.